we've had many people at Banter over the years, everyone from footballers to football managers to footballer wives to performers, politicians, business people. This is the first poet to appear at a Banter Salon.
I thought you were going to say this is the first football we have here.
This is Paul Muldoon. Please give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Paul's got a new book coming out in March in this side of the world called The Word in the Street, Rock Lyrics, and maybe you'd like to read something from the start?
Certainly, I'm delighted to try to do that. I've been interested for a long time in not only trying to write poems, but also trying to write song lyrics. As you know, in our culture, the two are very closely connected, intimately connected. Poems, in many cases, indistinguishable from songs. Now, some of these song lyrics, I suppose it's fair to say the pressure per square inch is a little lower than it might be in some of the poems, but I'm going to leave that for you to decide. This is a little one called It Won't Ring True. It Won't Ring True. Once your spray tan and my fake ID would take us anywhere we needed to be, in this world or the next. Now I've set aside my feelings for the pain you've been revealing in your most recent text. You see how up to date this is? My pride is hard to swallow and my promise overdue. But if a promise isn't hollow, you know it won't ring true. Your idea that I might take a plane through sleet and freezing rain is so vacuous. Don't forget the whopper Buddy told the big bopper about getting off the bus. Buddy had played the Apollo to victorious reviews, but if a victory isn't hollow, you know it won't ring true. You said I was talking hot air. I was talking through my hat. I was striking the wrong chord. It was either sharp or flat. Someday I'll hit the right note on a Martin D42. If a guitar isn't hollow. Once my fake ID and your spray tan were all we had in our retirement plan. Then you headed for the hills. There's a chance you'll reconsider and go with the lowest bidder and bend to my will. I never said I'd follow, is my excuse to you. But if an excuse isn't hollow, you know it won't ring true. So that kind of structure, I suppose, the classic... One of the things I find fascinating, I suppose, is that particular structure of classic song structure of A, B, A, the two verses and the chorus, and then the bridge or middle eight, a moment for some kind of little shift. Frankly, I think a staving off of boredom, coming to the point where actually we have to do something else, and I think actually that's one of the great impulses behind a lot of art making is the staving off of boredom. And I've my own theory. The sonnet, of course, which we associate with the poetry tradition, is a little song in itself. And my sense is that at some level, the 6 lines in many sonnet structures, the final 6 lines, are actually versions of the middle 8. That aspect, that part of the song.
Right.
Mm-hmm. The bridge, as it's known as.
You know, I mean, you've published many books of poetry. You know, you're also, you know, you've got your band situation. Like Wayside Shrines are the band that those lyrics are written for. Am I right in saying that?
That's right. This is a band, a kind of music collective based around Princeton, New Jersey, where I live, and it's a group of. Well, the makeup of the band changes a bit, 7 or 8 members, quite large, a collective, as I say, and there are many composers who are involved in the writing of the music. So it's a lot of fun for us. We're just, these lyrics are coming out in March in this part of the world, and we'll have a few tunes available, at least on the net, if nowhere else.
When you were growing up in County Armagh, what came first for you? Was it poets or was it rock musicians?
You know, I was listening today in Dingle to a recording of Bruce Springsteen, and it occurred to me that he, among others, may actually have been an influence, certainly on a book that came out in 1980 called Why Brownlee Left. That was a bit later on. I started writing in the 1960s when I was a teenager, and sort of started in earnest, as it were, when I was about 20, 21, the first book came out. And I think there was always a little negotiation between the two. I was brought up, of course, on, among other things, poetry in Irish, Gaelic poetry, which certainly connected immediately with the song tradition, was taught it by the great musicologist Sean O'Boyle in Armagh. And he often sang the poems to us. So there was that connection. Rock and roll, we had our, in the mid to late 1960s, of course, the Beatles, the Stones, Jimi Hendrix, the Who, the Kinks, et al. Were our heroes. And I think we were, you know, as influenced by that as we were by John Donne, perhaps more so. More into that than we were into what we were meant to be reading.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Springsteen, because I mean Springsteen obviously is kind of a poet who reflects, or a lyricist who reflects the, you know, the New Jersey landscape quite a lot. And it's something like, it's the line from you when you were talking about like Moy, where you grew up. You said the bridge, the barn, the all too familiar terrain. In many ways, you know, as a poet, you're kind of you're reflecting what's around you, that humdrum lifestyle, that humdrum landscape, and pulling it out. So I mean, the parallels between you finding something in Springsteen and writing lines like that is quite obvious as well.
You know, one of the first poems I wrote, I was about 12, and it it ended up with this contrast between the fort at Charlemont, near where I was brought up, and everything it represented, the history of the place, set against the reek of gasoline. The reek of gasoline is the only line I remember now from the poem, the only phrase I remember, partly, I think, because my teacher said to me at the time, gasoline. I think you mean petrol. Petrol's what we call it here. And I was thinking, oh dear. You know, and I suppose at some level, I'm not quite sure when Gasoline Alley came out, but Gasoline, the American back of the mind, was very much with us. Yeah. It was to the fore as much as anything else. Yeah, one tries to make sense of what's immediately to hand, what's immediately on either side of one, and that included, in my case, and I think in the case of many of my generation, trying to make sense of American culture, as well as Irish culture, and of course the British culture.
Yeah,
all of them were forcing their ways in rather interesting ways.
That also meant as well, like as all these various cultures were coming at you from east and from west, that like it became about an assimilation of it all as well, which is why in many ways like Irish culture is quite interesting in that respect, because we're taking our cues from all over the place. Did you find that when you started like writing poetry, first of all, that, you know, that the influences were also coming from all over the place?
They were, and one of the great things about starting to write in the 1960s, as some of you will remember, was that there was a great focus in that era on poetry and translation, Penguin, European poets in translation. So we were reading Miroslav Holub, just as we were reading Seamus Heaney, or we were reading George Herbert, but we were also reading Zbigniew Herbert, the Polish poet. So we had a sense of a very big world coming into play. And that's one of the delights of you know, having poetry in translation, or indeed perhaps reading it in the original, as I read French poetry. I'm sure many people in Ireland still do that. I read French poetry as a student in Armagh. So I actually knew quite a lot about French poetry, and I'm sure some of that came into play too.
Yeah. maybe you'd like to read another piece?
Sure, I'd be delighted to. Let me see. When the Sumerians hit on the lyre, and the Egyptians the cat, and I told you my heart was on fire, you said, good luck with that. When Biro sketched out the ballpoint, and Stetson the 10-gallon hat, and Charnley his replacement joint, you said, good luck with that. When Levi-Strauss dreamt up blue jeans, and Adams the baseball bat, and Pasteur his rabies vaccine, you said, good luck with that. When Glidden patented barbed wire, and Yahweh tit for tat, and I told you my heart was on fire, you said, good luck with that. Thank you very much. Thank you. Some of these are rather slender on the page, I think it's fair to say. And of course, one of the interesting things about writing or attempting to write song lyrics is the idea that they're never quite complete. I find it absolutely fascinating when one's in the poetry business, as I attempt to be most of the time. You know, one is trying to think everything through, be completely circumspect about the poem, make sure that it's finished insofar as one can ever claim that in all directions. In the business of trying to write lyrics, one knows there's some element, some important element that's missing. And the music, of course, which is really necessary for the lyric to work. We admire on one hand those who write lyrics that stand up on the page, and yet someone like Paul Simon, Leonard Cohen, Bob Dylan, but at some profound level we know there's some critical element that is missing there, and to allow for that when one's writing a lyric is kind of difficult thing to try to do. Let me read another one here. This is called Elephant Anthem. Elephant Anthem. One just has to have a song called Elephant Anthem, if only to get one's mouth around that. I mentioned a drive-in here. A drive-in in this case is a drive-in movie theatre rather than a drive-in restaurant. I guess we don't have as many of either of those in Dingle, say, as we might. Maybe we will one day with
is there a Supermax in Dingle? No, no drive-in supermarket.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, it needs to be able to park outside and the screen is outside. Maybe one day.
One day, yeah.
With global warming. Elephant Anthem. The elephants have done a bunk. They've left on the late train. For when it comes to packing trunks, they're speedy in the main. And when it got, I know. And who writes this stuff? Really? And when it comes to skipping town, the elephants have got it down to a fine art. They too refuse to act their age, and when they go on the rampage, they're off the chart. They still rely quite heavily on scent for figuring out what it all meant. The elephants know project teams are good for rolling logs. You think I'm pushy, and I seem to treat people like cogs. Because push always comes to shove, the elephants go hand in glove in single file. When the dust settled on our show, you had me thinking you might go the extra mile to where we'd find a spot to pitch our tent and figure out what it all meant. The elephants are less disposed to hard work now they've found the Vineland drive-in will stay closed until the spring comes round. The Vineland drive-in has 2 screens where everything we've ever seen was at a slant. The elephants take in both sides as each projects on its own hide an elephant. They also see how little time we've spent in figuring out what it all meant. Love Gone Wrong, of course, the core.
Before you read that, just something that kind of struck me there, like Paul, as you were talking, you were kind of describing the poetry business as kind of quite painstaking. You know, you're crafting it, you're rewriting, redrafting, you know, you're checking it out, making sure it all works. In the case of rock lyrics, in the case of rock song, the collaboration involved. You've another bunch of musicians. You've a bunch of musicians coming in, you know, messing with your words, maybe casting aspersions on your words, scratching their chins, thinking like that. When you were like working with the band, and when you were kind of like examine the idea of rock lyrics, how does that kind of like weigh up in your mind?
You know, one of the delights of working with musicians is the collaborative component. It's also one of the quite dismaying aspects of working with anyone is just that, where most poets, of course, are working by themselves, if they could even get themselves involved. But, you know, I find it really exciting to see what other artists, musicians in this case, bring to the process. Most of these songs, the lyrics were written first, and then the music came later. But they're written in ways that one hopes, and indeed we've discovered, they actually are, what would one say, they're feasible, they're plausible, or perhaps more than that, musically. But of course one never quite knows the extent to which, you know, what the song is going to sound like, even though there is a template there. And one of my very favourite CDs, for example, is a recording by various artists of a range of Leonard Cohen songs. It's called I believe it's called I'm Your Man. I think that's what it's called. Yeah. May have that wrong. But to hear, for example, Willie Nelson sing Bird on a Wire as a sort of country song is absolutely fantastic. There's something durable about the cores of these songs that somehow they will. Dylan, I suppose, is the classic case of someone who. I mean, my own theory is that Dylan can't really remember how his own songs go, which is why he never does them twice in a row in the same way. Well, that's sort of uncharitable, I know, mischievous. But
true.
But the thing is that they're sort of endlessly renovating themselves. They're absolutely brilliant, and he's absolutely brilliant in that respect, discovering new things all the time. Yeah. I came recently in contact with an Indian singer, woman who specialises in ghazal settings of the particular form called the ghazal or ghazal. Where the poems on which these songs are based are indeed written in advance and then handed over to musicians. So I suppose there have been many periods when that has happened. It's hardly been the norm in the last 40 or 50 years, I suppose, since the rise of the singer-songwriter, where in so many cases they're writing the music first, or writing the two simultaneously. I'm fascinated, for example, to hear that Paul Simon, whose lyrics are so brilliant, always writes the music first, on the principle that it doesn't really matter how good the lyrics might be. If the music isn't spectacular, nobody really gives a hoot. Yeah. So there are arguments in both directions.
Right. Do you want to read another piece?
I'll read another one. Thank you very much indeed. I'm kind of picking these as we go along here. You know what? This is one called... Sorry? You okay?
Oh.
This
Offstage noises.
No, offstage. That's lovely. It's collaborative.
If this is a live recording, like this, we can edit this out afterwards. You know.
You're going to edit this out?
No, not really. But if
It
was a live album.
So I'll end with this song about a relationship that has endured for quite a long time, and it uses the imagery, the iconography of the the rock band that is making a comeback. Various bands I think I had in mind when I was writing this. One of them certainly would have been The Who. You might want to keep them there somewhere in the back of your mind as we listen to this. Thank you very much indeed for the opportunity.
Thank you very much for being here, Paul.
Yeah, delight to be here. Comeback. We were introduced by Bruce at the Stone Pony. All that concentrated juice, standing room only. You were with some suit from EMI or Sony who was so full of toot he called for Moni Moni. You came back to the slum, the squat, with Lars and Sammy. Then Lanois' green thumb grew us a golden Grammy. And then our double album hit a double whammy. When it reached #1, we reached for our Swami. To make a comeback, baby. A comeback, don't you see? It's time to come back to me. Then our master's voice told us it was cool to park the Rolls Royce in the swimming pool, while our drugs of choice were run from Istanbul through a girl called Joyce, whose real name was Mule. We loved the paparazzi flash, the paparazzi zoom. When we finished our stash of magic mushrooms, we'd pay in cash for a kilo of Khartoum and come back to trash another hotel room and make a comeback. A comeback, don't you see? It's time to come back to me. When we broke up, we swore we'd never kiss and tell, never speak to each other until hell freezes over, or whatever hell does when it's co-produced by Eno and Woz. But behind the music, and where are they now, have pointed the way. They've shown us how to take a leaf from Plant and Page and Fleetwood Mac and set the stage for a comeback. Don't you see? It's time to come back to me. We'd no sooner said farewell than it was time to reunite. A flame's likelier to swell in a diminished light, for though we're a hard sell, what with the cellulite, we're still clear as a bell, we're still pretty tight. So let's remember the fans as we fan the embers and hit the meadowlands this coming September. When we take each other's hands, baby, let's remember we're just another band with only 2 surviving members. Making a comeback. A comeback, don't you see? Come back to me. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.